Thank you. It's a treat to be here. I want to thank Olivia and Nikolai for the chance to speak to the most intelligent pension audience on the planet. I mean that. It's a great thrill. And let me jump right in and say I failed at retirement my first time. And so I went to teach at Dartmouth, and now I'm back at BlackRock. And that's because my colleagues at BlackRock concluded that BlackRock did not adequately understand the subject. What it was going to take to finance the consumption of aging populations around the world all at the same time. And so I spent 2 years trying to figure that out. What is it that BlackRock does not know that we and our clients would like to know? And one of my conclusions, more or less, subject to Olivia's guidance, so it fits in the right title, is that we have to simultaneously solve for saving and aging and investing and spending. All four at the same time, both at the individual level and at the social level. So I'm going to try to go through the first bit of slides really fast, and it'll make your head spin a little bit. That's okay, because then we'll come back and we'll review it all again. Right at home back in a classroom. And whether it's genetics or environment that gets people to fill in from the back, someday we'll figure out. No one wants to sit in the front row. So the objective is easily stated, how to provide financial security. But what's the critical constraint? The critical constraint is we've got to store up sufficient future purchasing power to support a rising share of the population. That's the demographic reality we're up against. We can do that pay-go, we can do that funded. Pay-go means we're going to rely on future taxes on capital and labor. Funded means we're going to rely on capital market claims on future income. That's harder. Taxes seems hard, but this isn't that easy either. And we have to worry about what's going to be sufficient. The three big problems we're going to confront is what's the rate of economic growth, what's the return on financial capital, and what changes in the distribution of life expectancy are we going to face. And then we're going to sum it up, and I'm going to tell you there are three sets of problems. We're going to have to solve problems of national savings, problems of personal savings, and problems of investing and spending. So if my only success today is to get you to remember this slide, I'm so happy. I want you to realize we have to do all of these things. We don't get to choose just one cell. So we got problems of national savings, having to do with savings comes from income comes from growth, population change is going to affect that. We got to find demand for savings, we got to find a place to put the savings. We can solve problems of personal savings, completely different dimension. And then we have to deal with problems of investing for the long term. And now when I deal with problems of spending, I'm going to confess I'm not really going to deal with the composition of spending. I'm just going to try to make it possible for you to spend. I'm solving a financial engineering problem. I'm not going to go all the way down there. I also, when I look at it this way, I'm taking political economies as I find them. I'm a crass pragmatist. I'm not here to lecture countries about how to reform themselves. I got too many countries when I sit at BlackRock. It's a little too complicated. I'm just trying to navigate different political economies. This is a roadmap. This is a compass to help you navigate them. So, jumping in, income is where savings comes from and where investment wants to go. So we save a portion of our income. That's the verb to save. But our savings earn a positive return if we invest them wisely in someone else's income. That's the noun. Two different questions. Economic growth, we measure as changes in hours worked plus changes in productivity plus new investment spending. 2 out of 3 of those are directly going to be connected to demographics. Hours worked and new investment spending. You do not build apartment buildings for people who are not there, as our Chinese friends are discovering. It's not a good plan. Productivity is the complicated one. We'll try to touch on that. Population change is going to influence all of this. And as investors, remember, we're storing up these claims on capital market assets. We've got to find incremental sources of return. That's going to come from incremental sources of labor, maybe from substituting capital for labor, if that works. and maybe from deploying our savings into where we find investment demand. That's a mouthful. Here, just quickly, fewer babies, fewer workers. So on the left, you have fertility rates since 1950 collapsing across the G20. G20 is my simple proxy for the investable universe. And on the right, you see the UN's medium trend outlook for working age population changes across the G20 onto an 80-year horizon. This type of picture on the right, I borrow from Adele Hayutin's terrific 2022 book, New Landscapes of Population Change. And recall, it has both a fertility assumption and a longevity and trend immigration. You can't really predict immigration out too far, but they're trying. The UN is trying. Let's drill down. Japan is our poster child for a society that's gotten old quickly in front of our eyes. And I want you to see how the economy and demographics interact with each other in the labor force. So upper left, pink bars are the unemployment rate. Black line is the change in the working age population. Black line dotted is what it would have been without immigration. Japan had more immigration than you thought. And the red line is changes in hours worked. And right in front of your eyes, most of us were around, the Japanese economy, then the world's second largest, lost 11% of its body mass. Hours worked disappeared. And that tends to slow down growth. They did some amazing, but then look at the red line stabilizes. And that was Prime Minister Abe's heroic work getting women in the workforce, lower right, and pushing out retirement ages. Astounding. Adam Posen, PIIE, a friend of mine, they thought they could, Japan could get 800,000 women in the workforce. They got 3 million more. So you can make a difference, but lower left is contribution to GDP. Green is productivity, yellow is new investment spending, capital, red is labor. See, labor subtracting from growth. Productivity, pretty good. Japan's done a pretty good job. Those green bars and the positive axis, pretty impressive. Anyway, there we have Japan. For contrast, we can look at the sick man of labor force participation rates, the United States of America. We cannot keep hours worked catch up with the growth in our working age population. That's because if you look on the lower right, you see we've been drifting lower labor force participation rates, even though a slight uptick after COVID. Please don't pat yourself on the back for that. We got a little uptick in retirement ages, not much, not as much as Japan or Germany or anybody else. And we've still got a pretty strong economy. Look at the size of the immigration wedge the United States is running, the gap between the black dotted line and the solid black line. Now, Australia beats us, but we'd already have a declining working age population but for immigration. And you can read the papers every day and see everyone's admitting the U.S. economy is still chugging along without inflation because more people are flowing into the country, immigration legal or illegal. So there's a little primer on countries are more different than you think. It's all going to be about how we adapt. So I'm showing you this rather complicated slide for two reasons. Demographic challenge that major industrial economies are going to face. It's bigger than you think. And that's also a challenge for investors, savers, and pension funds looking to find returns on capital. That's why we're looking at this chart. So here we've got the forecast out to 2040 for the G20. And the first row of numbers is if we annualize the next 10 years change in working age population. And the next set of numbers, realized productivity, that's the last 10 years. What was the annual change in productivity for each country? Sum those two numbers, you've got your crude starting point for your GDP forecast. You got to anchor on these two numbers. You can improve on them, but you better anchor here. While you're looking at that, and you're staring at that jumble of lines, I'm going to read to you the conclusion of Charles Goodhart and Manjo Pradhan in their 2020 book, The Great Demographic Reversal. After explaining that Japan, since 1999, has experienced just a little less than 1% real GDP growth per year, they then say, please look at the other advanced countries will do well if they can match this record over the next 20 years. And that picture is telling you why, just so you don't take it on faith with them. The next two columns tell you about shares of the MSCI and shares of global GDP to tell you where we can all go as investors put our money. And then I sum it up into three groups. We have the countries that have demographic tailwinds, which may or may not have the highest growth rates. They still have to employ their labor endowment. But they're a rather small share of the investable universe, 8%. 65% of the investable universe where we can put our claims on other people's income are in countries that are either stagnant, US, UK, Brazil, labor forces over the next 20 years, or declining ones. So look at the bottom, Korea and Italy. Similar labor force adaptation, losing about 1% of working age population a year. Korea with 1.6% productivity growth over the last 10 years per annum, and Italy with 0. Now, these are OECD numbers. They flatter some countries and not others. We're going to move on. I'm going to summarize the income challenge. So countries with still rising populations are among the least developed, the fewest resources with which to deploy their demographic endowment. So you can read about people in India with PhDs waiting in line to get visas to move to Israel to be agricultural workers. Not great for deploying their demographic endowment. Countries with stagnant or falling populations, big share of GDP, can we sustain it by keeping the immigration coming? Coming attraction, can we fix this by substituting capital for labor? Once I get everyone to this point of the conversation, that don't worry, Peter, we can substitute capital for labor. And my question is, any problem of diminishing returns? Do you assume the more capital we throw at a problem, the more we fix it? Do you think productivity gains are going to be evenly distributed? CEG, Italy, and Korea? Oh, well, if the marginal product of capital turns out to be lower than the marginal product of labor, we're dumbing down productivity. We're not increasing it. You actually have to have marginal product of capital be higher than the marginal product of labor. Worth considering. That's, and so we have to work our way through that. Now, one last problem to work on, which before we get to the fun part, we have to find a place to put our savings. It's not obvious there's going to be such places. You can't have a financial asset unless someone creates a financial liability. So I'm channeling Richard Koo about Japan 20 years ago and Michael Pettis about China today. We need to look through the world through this prism of demand for savings. How's moving around? Banks will always take our savings from us. Will someone else give us a better return? That someone else has got to be capital markets. Full stop. Well, will it be domestic capital markets or will it be foreign ones? Do we have enough place to store up savings domestically because people has demand for the capital? Or will we export capital to some other country? That's what it boils down to. So just for entertainment, here's the United States. The 4 sector balances have to sum to 0 every year. Pink, we've got household. Green, we have corporate. Yellow, we have government. And red is the external sector. And now through the looking glass, the external sector is in surplus when the country is running a current account deficit. So here you can see the household sector in the US is gently moving over these 20 years into positive financial territory. And on the right side, you can see gently the pink bar, hashed bars, household loans are going down from the great financial crisis. They're paying down their debt. Government's borrowing, that's the part of the capital markets that's growing. Corporate sector is flat financing. They're not offering a lot of new places for people to demand. As strong as the US economy is, we're not growing the liability side of the corporate sector's balance sheet. So it's worth seeing. This isn't a one-for-one, but it's a powerful influence from annual sector balances to capital market development. And at least the US capital markets are growing, although I think that's a price effect in the equities at the top. For contrast, this time, here's Germany. Something similar, some things not. Household in surplus, corporates in surplus, governments a little bit of deficit, massive current account surplus, external sector deficit. Sadly, for the German household sector, they don't hold that. The banking sector does. And it's getting recycled through the ECB. We'd have to spend another hour on that. But capital markets are not growing. Domestic capital markets, they're accumulating claims on the rest of the world. Okay, we're going to shift gears now. There's the economics and finance problem. Now, here's the topic of your wonderful conference and all the lovely papers this morning I thoroughly enjoyed. We're moving a completely different dimension, problems of personal savings, problems of choice. Who gets to choose what? And I almost kept score this morning all the times. One of my lines on this was mentioned this morning, but I decided not. I was having too much fun listening. So I think we've got who, what, how, and why not. So 3 types of savers: accidental savers, people with high incomes. I call them intentional savers, middle incomes, and they actually make an intentional choice to consume now or later. And constrained savers, low incomes. So first we got to say, which group are we talking about? And let's not pat ourselves in the back when the top of the income distribution saves because they can't help themselves. We only have 2 choices to save. Remember, I'm navigating political economies. I'm not being normative about what they should do. Whether to save it all and how much, we talked about that, and where to invest our savings once we have chosen to save it. And then there are 2 ways we can make a choice. Someone can make it for us, or we get to make it. That's it. We now can navigate different political economies and see how they sort things out. And the differences are really subtle. And for fun, I'm going to slip in a little teaser here. I tried to think of a comparison here to show you how subtle, and it would take too long. Singapore and Denmark, they both have mandatory. They both have lots of complicated choices. There actually is more choice in Singapore than in Denmark if you cut through it all. But the reason both those countries have good retirement systems is because 60 years ago, both of them settled on solving the national savings problem. That's why they both have good systems. It's nothing to do with this. Little differences, we can improve on outcomes a little bit by navigating this stuff better. They solved that 50 years ago. But now the fun part, overcoming problems of human choice. This is my personal idiosyncratic list of the hurdles we have to go through to get someone to make a wise financial decision. We start with problems of affect, emotion, and salience. Have you ever been to a dinner party and tried to strike up a conversation by saying, let's talk about money and death and running out of money before you die? You just hit the fight-flight reflex. Freeze. No one wants to talk about it. Nobody. We're not getting to cognition. It's over. You lost them. So lots of problems of affect and emotion and salience. Reference points. We only make decisions by comparing it to something, and we don't know which it's going to be. And as I've mentioned to Olivia previously, Daniel Kahneman's most important insight for us all is our reference points are labile. They move around all the time for all sorts of wacky reasons, body chemistry, a bird flew by. Our reference points change, and so our decision changes, so don't expect Homo sapiens to be time consistent. Risk appetite, risk aversion, prospect theory endowment effect. Did you frame it as a gain to be held onto or a loss to be avoided? Lots of other sources of human bias and inertia. I enjoyed all the references. And now I'm going to come to, this morning, cognitive load. So George Miller's famous paper in 1956, cognitive load is 5 plus or minus 2. You can put 5 things in your conscious workspace, maybe 3, maybe 7. I'm going to tell you from experience of managing portfolio managers responsible for billions of dollars, the safe harbor is 2. Forget about 5 or 7. You can get 2 things in your conscious workspace at the same time and talk to them and get people to understand that. 7, 12, 14, and we know a lot of people in the financial services abuse this and intentionally abuse problems of cognitive load to get people to make dumb decisions. Now we've made it to financial literacy. Terrific. We made it here, but we're not done yet because we still have to navigate problems of what I call competing incentives, complicated problems. I think I have pretty good knowledge of financial literacy. I'm spending too much time on this slide. But you want me to buy an option to get an income stream conditional on my living another year in the future. And you want me to surrender the option to be liquid to spend my money when I want to. And you want me to value those two options and know how they offset. And I don't think that's financial literacy. I think that's a complicated problem. And then we get to problems of choice and trust. So you all know the Stanford marshmallow experiment. 5? I'm already, oh my God, that's no fun. I'm going to go really fast here. An economist in Latin America told me, Mr. Fisher, if you're going to make the mistake of thinking of millions of our citizens don't know how to do intertemporal discounting for the time value of money when they're doing a different kind of discounting. They're discounting for distrust. And if we don't recognize that this is ubiquitous in financial services, we're not in the game. And we can confuse all of the prior subjects as a problem of trust. I'm not going to teach you about target date funds and life cycle investing, other than to point out it relies on the equity risk premium being there for us. This audience can appreciate that, and I don't know that it will always be there for us. So now we have to solve for our uncertain life expectancy. It's all just a setup to tell you we don't know what future returns to capital are going to be, and we don't know how long we're going to live. And everyone's got to solve that. I don't care if you're a DB scheme or the individual or an insurance company. We've all got to solve for this. We got two unknowns. Martin Wolf has stated the objective, I think, for us, which is large collective defined funds with higher expected returns on equity to provide reasonably predictable, though when necessary, adjustable pensions. How do we do that? Richard's going to be tough on me and run out of time. This is the most fun. I've conceded 5 extra. I've been conceded. Thank you, Olivia. Don't worry. Thank you, Olivia. I want you to think about how hard it is to be sure we know what future returns will be. So we all know about the old age dependency ratio. I want to see you translated in economic terms in the upper right corner. Japan's elderly per capita GDP in 1994 is 28 billion yen. Don't get confused by billions of yen. So we just divide total GDP in Japan to pretend it's only there for the old people. By the time we get to 2022, there's only 15 billion. It's a really hard problem. The head of BlackRock's business who used to work for me when I was chairman of Asia said, Peter, we're no longer the rich society you think we are. And that's what he's referring to. So we've got that constrained labor pool. We're trying to solve for higher productivity, and now everyone's going to tell us, don't worry, AI will fix it. So the literature goes back to the 1960s on distinguishing labor augmenting technologies to labor replacing technologies. And now that's what everyone's talking about. Will AI replace labor, or will it augment it and make us more productive? And Edmund Phelps and Oter and his co-writers at MIT will delve into that for you. But there's the reciprocal of that is what's happening to the capital and labor shares of income. If we're making labor more productive and we have to pay them more, then maybe the capital share goes down. We've had a 30-year tailwind of rising capital share to income, declining labor share. I don't know, that's too complicated for me. If we believe that it's going to be labor automating, we're replacing labor, we're driving wages down, we get more of a tailwind to capital, and it's not a pretty outcome. I tried to think of a way to make this salient for you. We all know the importance of salience. So these are two rather different visions of our future. Depends on, it'll be some muddle. But so the most optimistic vision I could find was John Maynard Keynes' 1930 essay on the economic possibilities of our grandchildren, in which he accurately anticipates the extraordinary gains in productivity that would unfold over the next 2 generations, and completely misses how we would spend that. He thought we'd all be working 10 or 15 hours a week. No, not what happened. The most depressing version of this I could find is Kurt Vonnegut's debut novel, Player Piano, where the overclass programs the computer and everyone else is unemployed. These are different visions about the distribution of income, which matters because of its importance in life expectancy. I just want you to hear, so will the slope of these lines change in the future? I don't know. If you think obesity drugs at $50,000 a year will be made available to the bottom quintile of the income distribution, you're more optimistic than I am. But I think it's really going to matter. And it comes back to those visions of the future. That was all just the setup. This is my favorite slide. We'll go back to the slide I want you to remember. This is the economic and financial problem we're trying to solve. At some point, we're stuck with a finite pool of capital. Yes, I know. Now we've made it. We've made it. Thank you. With the extra 5 from Olivia. So we've got 2 important uncertainties: future rates of economic growth and precisely how long we live individually and collectively. And so we need to solve an equation with 2 unknown variables. Luckily, there are lots of clever young people at BlackRock who can do that. I've forgotten how to solve an equation with 2 unknown variables, but that's what we need to do. Future returns, life expectancy. And I've only been able to identify 5 tools we can use. As societies, we're going to use these adaptively. Trial and error. We're going to try a little of this and a little of that. So I'm trying to figure out how we get a jump on that. And this was all a build-up to get you, the smartest pension audience on the planet, to tell me what I'm missing. Because I think that's the list. I can't think of something I'm missing. Remember, finite pool. Of course, we want people to save more. So we can change the volatility of the portfolio of assets. We can refine the actuarial characteristics of the liability, be better at estimating life expectancy. We can pool mortality, longevity risk by age cohort or actuarial. That's a trick in our bag. We could shed some or all mortality, longevity risk for a price in a period of time. Instead of passing it all to the insurance company's balance sheet, we could say, how about I buy 5 years of cover or 3 years of cover as my cohort gets to the end of life. I'm not going to pay for the uncertainty of hedging something in perpetuity. That's really expensive in my experience. And then you can change the payout. We can offer variable, not fixed benefits. The goal is the lowest all-in cost, because there's not enough insurance capital on the planet to write annuities for everyone who's going to need them over the next 50 years. It's not happening. So society is going to figure out how to adapt, and either we can consume less or we can try to save up our purchasing power more efficiently. That's the sum. That was the fun part. Here we're back to the beginning. Remember, this is how to navigate political economies and figure out what we do. I'm a crass pragmatist. And I'd love now to have the chance for your questions and feedback. Oh, while I'm looking at this page, while you're looking at this page, we had a big announcement at BlackRock, LifePath Paycheck. And I want you to understand it's not a solution to longevity risk. We're just passing it off to an insurance company balance sheet. In a way, only people in this room really in America will appreciate it's an amazing answer to problems of choice. I want you to think about how the armies of lawyers and lobbyists worked for the last 5.5 years, even longer, but at full-time for 5.5 years, to embed an option to buy an annuity at a future date and to pre-fund it as a default option inside a 401k plan and get past the hurdle of the record keepers, ERISA, SEC, state insurance commissions, general counsels of corporate sponsors. This room can appreciate how much work goes into that, solving a marvelous problem to take inertia and complexity out of the decision to have the option to buy an annuity that you pre-funded. Anyway, questions? Richard, over to you.